Hello, welcome to day 24. Now, in the previous lessons, we've used lots of built-in function. And of course, what function allows us to do is to call it without having to write lots of code. The print function, for example, it allows us to print, but under the hood, there are lots of lines of code that makes that happen. It is also possible that we create our own custom print function, so that whenever we need it to do something, we can call it and it will do just that. Let's write our first function. To write a function, you need the function keyword, which is div. Right then you need to reference the name. So we can call this intro. Now, once you have the name, which is what you're going to be using to identify it at any point, you have your parentheses. Once you have the parentheses, you also have the column. Now, after the column, then you declare your blocks. Whatever you want to happen whenever you call the function is going to live inside here. But just to start with, let us call the print function. Now, we're just going to print maybe a hello world or something. We can just say hello world. Welcome to Python programming. Okay, makes sense. Now, if you go ahead and run our code, probably nothing would happen. If I right click and just run it, you can see there is nothing happening. And this is, of course, understandable, because even when you don't call the print function, Python isn't printing the print function because, you did not explicitly call it to do something. So in the same manner as well, we want to be able to declare a function and for it not to do anything except when we call it. So now let's just try to trigger it. To trigger a function, all we need to do right now is just call the function with the name. So I'm just going to call it like this. And right now it should print because we are calling it. If I run it, now you can see it's been printed out. So one concept to understand is, for every time you run your program, there are certain things you don't want them to run, except when you call them, right? Now, I can call this multiple times, and Python is just going to do it multiple times. So you can see, so instead of me writing this again and again, I'm able to declare just one block of code and call it wherever I need it, and it's going to just do just like I said. Another thing to understand with Python, which you might want to do almost all the time, is to write a function that does either one calculation and return a value. So return statement is something very handy that you get to use oftentimes. Let's just go ahead and, of course, comment this one out and write more functions. Okay. So this time around, let's say we want the return statement. It's supposed to be statement, okay? Now let's define another div and let's call this add func, okay? So let's say we want it to return a calculation. It could be anything. So we're just going to say return, we can say 5 times 2. 5 times 2. Okay. Let's see where Python is complaining. Okay, it's expecting us to add space between. Now we've returned something, okay? So let's say, for instance, we go ahead and call the function. You can just say add func. What happens? Nothing happened. It doesn't print anything, right? Let's see what we get when we assign this very function to a variable. So we can just say new add variable. You can just copy this and have it there. Okay, so if we, I think, expect one more space. So that's one thing with PyCharm. There's a format that I expect you to always follow. So I'm just going to run it. Nothing is happening just yet. How about we go ahead and print the value, whatever the function is returning. I'm just going to say new add, and let's see the value. You can see 10. Okay. Now, what if we go ahead and maybe reference the value here, if there's any return value? Let's say add, no, that can just be intro. All right, so you can see that we're getting none because the function is not returning anything. So you're getting the value of none, and here you're getting the value of 10 because you ask it to perform a calculation and also return the value. Pretty much cool. Now let's talk about scope in function. Okay, now we know that function can perform tasks like print outputs and returning objects, but it can change the value assigned to the variable. Okay, so let's do something. Let's try creating another function. In fact, this time around, let's just comment out those print functions. So let's write something. Function scope. Let's write a variable. Let's call the variable x, and let's give it maybe value of 5. Then let's write a function and call it change x. Then let's write some calculation. In fact, let's reassign x, right, equals to 10. Then let's exit the function and let's see if we can print x. If we run this code, you can still see that the print function is printing the value of 5. Why is it so, even when we updated it inside the function? Now, two things we need to put into consideration. Remember, a function only runs when you call it. We haven't even called the function, and we are not inside the scope of the function. So every code that runs inside this belongs to this function. As far as this print function is concerned, it is not inside of this very function. So you need to really take notes. Now, what if we want to reference the new updated value? All we just need to do is to call the function, and we'll get, okay, we get none. All right, we get none because it's not a return value. We're not returning the value. How about we pass the x value into the function? pass this very x into the function. Let's see what we get. An error. Okay, we'll come back to parameter in the next lesson. We'll come back to parameter shortly, but let's see if we use a return statement here, right? Return statement. In fact, something isn't right here. Okay, let's assume that we put a parameter of x. Let's assume that we put a parameter of x, and if we check it, let's remove the return statement. Okay, this should work, I think. X isn't defined. Oh, so I think we need to pass in the x here. Okay, it's still returning none. What we can do, we need to return it actually for it to perform the magic. So I think what we can do is, let's do something like this. Let's just then return x. Okay, I think this is the right way to write it. So what we're doing is, whatever is being passed into whatever value we put here, right? Update it to 10 and return it. That's pretty much what's going on here. Then when we are calling the function here, we are passing in this 5, this x variable. Now let's run it and see. We should get our 10 now. Right. So you don't have to be confused. What we've done here, declare a variable with a single parameter. Now the parameter is what we reference here. Then we updated it and return it as well. Right. And when we are calling the function, we are passing it a value. Right. We're passing it an x or anything. It could be any value. Just make sure that it is something that the x or the function can work with. This can be anything else. It can pass in maybe 10, right? And maybe let's say 15. And it will still work, right? It's working with the value, not the variable name really. For us to further understand how parameter work in Python, let's write another example. So let's say we have a list, and let's just say we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, now let's declare a function that add more list to the list, right? So what we can just go ahead and do is write a diff and also just call it mutate list. Then we pass it a parameter. Parameter can be, let's call it list. This parameter can be anything. This is more like variable, right? Then we can just say lst plus equals to that whatever you're passing in here, add it equals to another list. So you can just say A, then another one, let's say B, and let's say C. Now, when you look at what we have right now, if we go ahead and let's say we print the new list, let's see what we get. So we can go ahead and just call the function and pass it this our list. So we're just going to call it mutate list and pass it the parameter of lst. Remember, when you are writing your print function, you write your string, right? So we as well, we are passing in our value to the function. If we run it, you can see the new list, right? So you're passing this very list into your function and you're adding the list to another list, then doing a print function. Pretty much cool. Now, I want you to check the exercise section, which I have added to your description. The video description contains the practice. Try it out and see what you can get. It's possible to have multiple parameters. Let's see how that works. To have multiple parameters, let's say it is, so let's say we need amount from the user. We want to write amount. There should be T here. We want it to be an integer. Then we want an input. So we can just tell the user to impute amount. Pretty much what we're trying to build is a percentage calculator, something that performs percentage calculation. And for us to do that, we need input from the user, at least two major inputs. One is going to be the amount and the other is going to be the percentage the user wants to calculate. Now, for us to do this, I'm just going to say impute the total amount. The total amount, okay? And secondly, we're going to tell the user to tell us the percentage. So we're going to say impute the percentage. Okay, now these are the two values we're going to pass into a function. Right, so let's declare a function called, of course, let's remember your div. Then you say, we can call it car percentage. You can just do that. Then let's pass in the two parameters. We can just say A and P, of course, the initials. Now, let's return something. Now, to calculate percentage, of course, it can be, can call this cal and just go ahead and say whatever value, whatever amount, whatever A times P, then divide by 100. Then let's return cal. Alright, so now we're writing a function that does calculate percentage. Okay, we grab two values from the user and do our calculation and return whatever value that comes out of it. Okay, if I go ahead and run it, you can see, in fact, let's stop this. Okay, I can just go ahead and run this. And right now it's asking us impute total amount. So let's say I have 5,000. Then I want to check the percentage. What is the 10% of 5,000? Okay. Nothing is happening, right? Because we did that calculation in a function. And we haven't even called the function. and probably send a value to the function. So let's do that right now. I'm just going to say cal percentage, and of course reference our amount and the percentage. Okay, now at this point nothing even really happens, so let's wrap this in a print function. I'm just going to wrap this in a print function, so we can just, in this print function, let's keep a description, the percentage, we can just do this. I think there should be R here. Yes. Now if we run it, let's see what we get. It's asking us, we can say 4,000. I can say 30%. Now you can see the percentage, 30% of 2,000 gives us 1,200. This is really cool, right? Because we're able to pass two values into our function. Now, one thing I should also let you know is that it is possible to pass so many values to your function. You can pass in as many parameters as you want, but just take note that you have to keep it simple so that it's really clean and neat. There's also what we call recursive in function. In other words, function can run like a loop until a condition is met, right? So I would advise that just try to Google that and see what it means to write a recursive function and give it a try. And that's how we'll wrap it up on this one. If you like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on all our social media handles so that you can be notified every time we release a new tip. Until next time, I'll see you in the next one.